Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on accurately forecasting resources versus demand. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so if you do have a question, please type it into the chat or question box, and we will answer your questions following the panel discussion. Our agenda here for today is a quick introduction, some overview of why we decided to do this webinar, as well as an introduction of our wonderful panelists, followed by the panel questions, and then an open Q&A at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions along the way. We will be going back to those at the end of the session. Based on what we've heard from Keaton Project's customers, forecasting resources versus demand seem to be one of the top challenges for many companies. So we wanted to get a panel of experts together to talk through resource forecasting trends as well as best practices to give you the insight needed to improve resource forecasting within your company. Let's meet the panelists. Randy Mislevic is the Managing Director of Resource Management Institute and has years of experience working with and advising companies with the complex challenge of leveraging services to deliver better outcomes, focused solutions, and operating efficiency. Brian McQuillan is the Director of Product Management here at Keaton and has many years of experience working with companies to select and implement software solutions to power their resource management priorities. And lastly but not least is Tom DeSimone, is the Vice President at Prairie Capital Advisors, an investment banking ESOP advisory and valuation services company where he manages firsthand company resources effectively versus demand. So let's get right to it. The first panel question is for Randy. What's the state of the market related to resource forecasting? Are people doing it? How are they doing it? And is it effective?
Great. Rachel, thank you for the introduction. Appreciate that. This is from the Resource Management Institute. Great question. Forecasting is, the Institute has a methodology called Global Resource Management, and it's got 6 elements, and one of those elements is forecasting. And we typically, I guess the way I'd best characterize the state of the market related to forecasting is developing. The industry, quite frankly, has a long way to go, and if you looked at the 6 different elements that we talk about in our GRM methodology as part of our just-in-time resourcing solution, the forecasting is a pretty critical linchpin to making this happen, and generally we find that organizations are less mature in this area than other aspects around managing their resources. We typically find organizations, when it comes to forecasting, few have really all sophisticated approaches to forecasting. Most have some approach that they've developed, although we tend to find them more piecemeal than, I'll say, holistically designed. One of the areas that we find that people really fall short on is just that simple time horizon is not looking far enough out. As we all know, human capital doesn't just materialize overnight. It takes time to recruit people, train them, onboard them, and make them productive for us. And so developing a 3 to 6 month time horizon is where organizations really need to be. But we found that few are at this point in time. So, just kind of sum it up is where are we at in forecasting, generally developing. How are we doing it? They're doing it, it's just not as sophisticated as it needs to be. But history clearly says we work with lots of organizations on this problem, and most organizations are able to get there. It's just a matter of putting in places the building blocks in order to be able to do that effectively.
Great. Thanks, Randy. And Brian, from your perspective, what does the market and resource forecasting kind of look like for you?
Well, a lot of things are in their infancy or developing, as he would say, in a lot of organizations around effective resource management. And we see a lot of cases where customers actually don't know what their resources capabilities are. So one of the major things that when we go to talk to customers about how they can effectively use their resources is, well, what are your resources? what kind of roles do you have them in? What kind of skill sets are you looking for? And do you have that right mix to carry out all the work that you're agreeing to for the organization? And a lot of them haven't quite figured that part out yet. And as they go further down the work life cycle, being able to forecast what kind of resources they're going to need, and as Randy says, put in place that plan to go out and either retrain the talent they have or go out and hire new talent. With our help, we often get our customers there to where they need to be able to do that effective forecasting.
Great, thanks, Brian. So the second question here is for Tom. Tell us a little bit about your business. And in your business, tell us why being able to accurately forecast the capacity of your resources and the demand for new projects is pretty essential.
Yeah, sure. So Prairie Capital Advisors is an investment bank, as you mentioned earlier, and we focus on all types of ownership transition. And in any of our projects, it's all transaction related. And it starts with other financial analysis, valuation, corporate finance initiatives, things like that. But in any of our projects, there's a timeline. And like many of you, timelines are important, and we're all working towards timeline. But in our particular business, the timelines are a little bit different in that, generally speaking, we have anywhere from 5 to 10 other professionals working at the same time on the same engagement. And these range from other investment banks to lawyers to bankers, tax advisors, etc. So when you have a timeline, you're managing to a deadline, and all 5 or 10 of you are managing to the same deadline. So missing the deadline is generally a significant impediment to the overall project. So when it comes to our resources, we need to make sure that our resources are able to put the proper amount of time on each project and be able to sync their individual timelines up to the timeline of the project. And what I mean by that is many projects say, okay, this project will take me 30 hours to complete. In our business, it's not just 2 hours a day for 15 days. It could be 8 hours one day, 0 hours the next day, 15 hours over the next 2 days, et cetera, et cetera. It's very lumpy. So for us, we need to make sure that in a life cycle of a project that the 2 or 3 of us that are on each engagement have 30 to 60 days of room to fit all the various projects into it. So being able to accurately forecast the capacity is what really we need to do. It's not necessarily accurately forecasting the timing of each task within a project, but it's estimating the capacity of all of our resources, and will that resource have the capacity 2 weeks from now on a Monday when a lawyer emails us and says, hey, we need this by tomorrow. So we've obviously chosen Keyed to be our resource management system and project management system. And we've done a lot of really neat things within Keyed that help us manage that capacity. And certainly a lot of it's, hey, what do you know on the ancillary? What do I see out in the office? Can I look out my door and I can see all my analysts? What are they doing? How busy are they? But we try to institutionalize that into a system, and that's what we use Keyed for.
Awesome, Tom. Thanks. Brian, for companies that aren't able to do this effectively, what sort of negative impacts have you seen?
So for those companies that don't, forecast their resources effectively, the main impact is you can't make proper decisions on the work that you're carrying out in the organization if you don't know the capacity and type of resources you have or are going to need for the future. Also, if you're not aware of these capabilities of the resources, you run into the risk of always going to the same guys that get things done. So you may end up overloading the capacity of some resources and underutilizing the capacity and skills of other resources. So being able to effectively plan that out means that you can smooth out the work effectively with the resources that you need. And I've also seen some people go to the other extremes where they have to, they think that effective resource management is planning out every single task on a project that may be 18 months long. which kind of causes them issues, negative impact as a business needs change. So there needs to be a little more flexibility in their thinking about effectively managing resources. Rachel.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. The next question here we have is for Randy. What best practice tips would you have for companies to effectively and accurately forecast their resources?
Well, not a great question. I'll mention 5 things at a high level that we think are important. Back to my comments about developing a more sophisticated, disciplined approach to forecasting. I'd start with number 1 is identifying, what are your data sources for your forecast. And so Tom talked about, capacity planning is really important to them and their organization. And so there's one source of data is what is our capacity. Another certainly is going to be the demand side. What are the sum total of the projects that we're going to do, and so those would be typical 2 big inputs in an enterprise IT organization. If you're in a professional consulting services organization, you might focus on what's the input for the sales forecast as an example, but really figuring out what your data sources need to be to have an accurate forecast. That's number 1. Number 2 is focus on data quality. And so any one of those sources is, we all know the expression garbage in, garbage out. So you want to make sure that the data quality that you're getting from those sources, since you're going to be making human capital decisions as a result of this, and project planning decisions, et cetera, getting the data reasonably accurate is pretty important. And while we know forecasting these things will never be 100% precise, is getting as close to precise as we can is to everyone's benefit. So number 2, focus on data quality. Third is expand your time horizon. The vast majority of enterprise IT organizations we work with, or professional consulting service organizations, just frankly have too short a horizon. We typically will see people able to forecast out 2 to 4 weeks, and after that, the view of the future gets a little bit fuzzier. We really try to drive people towards 3 to 6 months as a time horizon. Again, because of the constraints around just getting good human capital and getting them in place and making them productive doesn't happen overnight. So expanding the time horizon is number 3. 4 is we really encourage in our just-in-time resourcing approach interlocks within the organization. So in this case, if I was in an enterprise IT organization, having some interlock between the IT organization that's got to go do the work with the business units that are driving perhaps the demand for that, to make sure that there's clear alignment of what the organization intends to do versus what's going to perhaps get left out of the schedule for future dates based on some prioritization. The same thing would be true in a professional consulting services organization where you're selling billable services, and so you'd have some kind of a sales forecast, and getting sales in the room to interlock with the delivery team to make sure everybody's got a clear view of what the next 3 to 6 months look like. We find that process of interlocks drives better accountability, and it helps people get enrolled in the process of doing this. And last, and certainly not least, is use your PPM or PSA tool. So it sounds, Tom, sounds like you're making good use of Keyed to help them with their forecasting methodology. So, but that tool is only going to be as good as the data you supply it through whatever format. But make use of that PPM or PSA tool to its fullest extent. So you put the power of software and hardware to work for you. So those 5 things: identify your sources, focus on data quality, expand your time horizon, conduct interlocks within the organization, and use that PPM or PSA tool to your fullest extent.
Great, thanks, Randy. You named a number of examples there that people could start to implement today, so that's great insight. The next question, Tom, could you talk a little bit about your processes and how Prairie Capital manages resources against project demand, and then also what role Keyed has played in enabling that process for you?
Yeah, so Keyed, again, is our main project management system, and we manage probably 95% of our projects out of Keyed, meaning that at the launch of a project, it initially finds itself in Keyed, and we then now start allocating our team to that project. The way we go about allocating our team is by several of the ways that we've already talked about today. But we look at, particularly for our business, again, we look at capacity and how much capacity does any one resource have. So on any engagement, we likely have about 3 individuals from our firm on that engagement. And each one of those individuals has different responsibilities within the project. What we've done in Keyed In is various things. So Keyed In allows you to have, in the tab called the Analytics tab, it allows you to have custom reporting mechanisms to show you information that's important to you and your company. And maybe even more importantly, information that's important to a specific individual. So for us at Prairie, what we did was we created a dashboard for all project managers, and all project managers see the same type of information. And that information is the information that we deemed to be important to the management of all of our projects at the company. And just so everyone knows, we run through a lot of projects, probably about 350 projects per year that range anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to 6 to 9 months. So they vary all across the board on what type of demand that we're seeing. But anyway, so on our analytics tab or on our dashboard, we have 6 different pieces of information that we're looking at. And some of this ranges to project profitability. And the reason that that's important is because if we're not hitting our profitability targets, it's a red flag to us that maybe there's a project issue. And now we can say, okay, what's going on with that project? Do we need additional resources or different type of resources on the project to make sure we get it back in line with what our goals are? The other pieces of information we're looking at are more scheduling and resource allocation type pieces of information. For example, every one of our deliverables has to have a specific write-up from our industry analyst. So we have an analyst that writes anywhere from a 3 to 10 page write-up on the economy, the various industries that we're working with, etc. And that report has to go in each one of our 350 engagements. And out of the 350, I would say 300 of them are specific to that client. So we're not copying and pasting. So you can imagine it's critical in our business to have a very proper schedule of when those industry reports need to be written. So what we've done is created in the system, in Keyed In, a way for our project managers to schedule when a report or a deliverable is due. And when that report is due, it automatically triggers a due date for the industry. And you can set it on, it's just like a normal Gantt chart. It's a predecessor event. We say that, hey, the report's due on August 30th. And Keyed In kicks it back and says, okay, well, if the report's due August 30th, the industry report is due August 20th. So we have a 10-day buffer. And our industry analyst on her dashboard, she can now have a very clean and crisp chronological order of her industry reports that she's writing. And it's very dynamic. Anytime a project manager goes in there and changes dates, it filters its way through to our industry analyst. It subsequently filters down to our analysts. So everybody can see where the project timeline is. Well, the second piece of this is what I'll say is that, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, our resource needs are very lumpy. It could be very quiet for a week, and then in week number 2, we could be putting 30 or 40 hours on one project. So what we've done is we've created, again in Keyed In, a way to measure that. And so Keyed In, like many project management softwares, they manage tasks, or they allow you to manage tasks. We're less task-oriented because our projects are so lumpy. But what we've done is created a dashboard that shows all of our project managers and analysts where in the life cycle of the project we're at. And you can think of this kind of like a percent completion. And ours is in five phases, so 20% apiece. And we know that 0 to 20%.
Looks like we lost Tom for a little bit, so we'll move on to the next question. Brian, do you have any other examples of keyed-in customers who have leveraged technology like Prairie Capital to effectively forecast resources, and what benefits have they seen?
Well, funnily enough, Rachel, it's a good question. I was actually on a call prior to this one with a customer who has implemented resource management from Keyed-in. And one of the benefits that they got was they were able to actually start processing about 33% more work than they had from their previous solution, which was using spreadsheets to drive how they forecast resources. So they were able to immediately return value to the business, as they're a kind of a project outsourcing business to their organization, and do better work for their customers. And especially we see a lot of that if you can, or the services-based organizations that are using resource management, if you know what projects you're able to staff your resources on, and knowing the capacity and capability of these resources, effectively use them, because having folks sit on the bench affects revenue, and that tends to be bad for business for them.
Yeah, definitely something you don't want to see. Randy, so whether somebody is going to work with Keyed-in or another solution, how do you suggest they approach finding the right technology for them?
So again, great question. And early on, I think, Rachel, you mentioned that resource management, the topic of this webcast, is one of the biggest challenges human capital intensive organizations have. And we recently did some research that you can get through the Resource Management Institute website that clearly points out, whether you're an enterprise IT organization or you're a professional consulting services organization, PPM and PSA buyers today, the number one reason that they're and functionality that they're looking for today is resource management. The industry's really woken up to the fact that resource management is a really important driver of project success. I just answered a question. It was in a question box. Somebody asked the question, why is there so much focus on project management and not enough on RM? And I just basically say that the industry just hasn't had a lot of data and research up until recently, and our research is real clear as the primary driver of project success, or by the way, project failure, is poor resource management capabilities, both by the way supporting technology like you would get with Keyed-in, or supporting process to support the process of resource management. So the way we would suggest anybody approach this is like any software decision: is what are your requirements? Is sit down and kind of, what do I need to get done? And don't let your software drive your process. Let your process drive your selection of software. I'll clearly also say, don't look for the perfect fit of software, because it usually just doesn't exist. But there are generally pretty good best fits that you'll find out there. But start with sitting down and coming up with, what are the requirements that you have for resource management? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What about reporting needs? What about dashboarding? Those kinds of things. And then make the vendor that you're going to work with show you how that solution is going to work in your environment. When we work with somebody who's asked us for help in a selection, is we ask the vendors to take use cases from the client company and say, okay, well, here's our resource management needs, and here's a couple of examples of how we would intend to use our PPM tool. Please show us how this is going to work in your tool. So you get a chance to see, not only, by the way, does it support the functional needs, but does it support the process/workflow needs that the organization has. So it's really, really important. So again, resource management, top of the list for organizations today, because the industry's really woken up to this, is really important. And so the vendors that have gotten out in front of this and said, okay, we're going to put more emphasis into resource management functionality, are going to be the leaders of the future relative to the best PPM or PSA tools out there.
Yeah, definitely all great points there, Randy. Hey, Tom, did we get you back on the line?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there.
No, not a problem. So if we wanted to just go back to your question quick, I know you're in the middle of answering that. Did you want to finish up real quick?
Yeah, so I think maybe you only lost the last closing statement I was making. What I was suggesting is that we've identified at Prairie, we've identified the pieces of information that are critical to our management of projects and resources. And what we've done is we've leveraged that information along with what Keyed is capable of doing, and created everything from custom reports in Keyed to out-of-the-box reports in Keyed to leverage that information, allow us to properly manage our projects and resources. And I think what's really cool about it is that on the analytics tab or our dashboard that we use, it's effectively in real time. When you log in and refresh everything, it's up to date. So we can make changes on the fly on a Tuesday, on a Thursday, in the morning, in the afternoon. It doesn't matter. We make a change and it filters itself through the entire system and subsequently filters itself through our entire organization. So every person that's involved in that project is seeing the changes that are being made to the life cycle of the project. And then my final comment is, I'm talking a lot about project management and resource management. There's certainly a side of the business that's administrative in nature. Our administrative team, our finance people, our marketing people, and then also our office manager who manages our engagement letters, contracts, etc. They all have access as well. So they're seeing all this information on the projects and all the things that our resources are doing, and they're able to do their job better as well. So anything that they're managing outside on the ancillary piece of the project is all tied back to what what buttons the project manager is clicking in the system and how it's flowing through the entire organization.
Yeah, great stuff, Tom. So actually there's a question that came in for you as you were talking there. They said, any examples of that key information that you can share?
And I'm sorry, what was the question?
Are there any examples of that key information that you were talking about that you can share?
Sure. Yeah, I can tell you everything that's on there. We have six, like I said, on our dashboard, we have six categories of information. Our first piece of information that everyone from a project manager down to an analyst sees is report due dates. And what I can see on that is who's the project manager, who's the analyst, and when is the report due. Remember I said our report is kind of what drives everything else. When the report's due, it triggers a waterfall of events for everybody else in the company. So I can see every project and when those projects are due, and again, that's triggering kind of all the other information. I then have another box that shows me how many projects are unassigned. So me as a project manager, when I get a project allocated to me, it goes into a box that we've called unassigned projects. And what this means is that I now have a project that is new and it is now being passed to me as a project manager, and I now have to set everything up. I allocate my resources, I put my target dates in for the project, and then that again trickles down through the organization for everybody else's due dates. The goal for our firm is to have nobody with any projects in an unassigned project box. If we have an unassigned project, it means we've been engaged, we're ready to do the work, but we have not put a team in place and we have not kicked off the project. So obviously that's a bad thing. On the ancillary, every Monday we meet with our teams and we run a report on that piece of information and say, okay, who has projects that have not been set up, and let's review as a team to make sure those get set up. The third box shows me recently engaged projects. I can see now a project when we were engaged. We have retainers on all our projects, so did we get the retainer or did we not get the retainer? And then also, has that project ended? If it's ended, what it does is it gives me an end date. So the way I'm looking at it right now, I have a project. I can see when we got engaged. I can see when I got my retainer. And then I can also see that it has an end date. If it has an end date, it means the project's done and we build it. Because it's still in my system, I know that we haven't been paid, because the only way that a project really officially closes is if you get paid, right? So once we get paid, the project then comes off of my screen. So by doing that, I can see if the project has been invoiced yet or not been invoiced, and where now in the accounting world does my project sit. The next box, I have industry report due dates. Remember, this is what I was talking about earlier. Every one of our projects has an industry write-up. And that industry write-up is on my dashboard. I can see every one of my projects and when my industries are due. As I mentioned earlier, I have a project profitability. So every project that I'm working on, I can see in effective real time. So real time, I guess, to the limits that people are submitting their timesheets. But in real time, what my profitability is. And we have, as a firm, have a target profit margin on every one of our projects. And so I can see, am I getting close? Do I have wiggle room? Am I under? And I can manage my project to the profitability metrics. And then finally, we have that piece of information that we built that shows that percent complete that I was talking about earlier. So again, every one of my projects, I can see in what part of the life cycle is my project, and that helps me know where I'm going to need heavier support or where I can let my analysts go and work on other things. So again, this is what my dashboard looks like. It's highly customized, so we can move it around. Our analysts have a different dashboard. Our industry analyst has her own dashboard. So we've created dashboards that are geared towards the class of the employee that we're working with.
Tom, that is awesome. Some very helpful examples of real life situations that you guys are dealing with and how we're able to customize that stuff for you. We're going to move on to the last question of the panel, and then we'll kind of answer some of our attendee questions. But the last question is for all of the panelists. So what next steps can you suggest to someone who wants to improve resource forecasting? Randy, why don't we start with you?
Rachel, I'd go back to the 5 things I mentioned earlier on from a forecasting point of view is really understanding what your data sources are that are necessary to produce an accurate forecast. Number 2, focus on good data quality so you avoid the garbage in, garbage out scenario. Expanding your time, you really got to focus on 3 to 6 months. And you know, interesting is a lot of organizations tell us, well, it's just not possible to forecast our project needs over that period of time. But, you know, that was, you know, if you went back 30, 40 years when manufacturing was trying to figure out just-in-time manufacturing and supply chain, you heard the same kind of comments back then. But today, those organizations are pretty doggone sophisticated around how they do that. And the organizations we see that are really putting discipline in forecasting are enormously more accurate around their forecasts for human capital project needs. So that's the 3rd. 4th, again, is build an interlock process in your business so that you build accountability in the organization of getting reliable information to create this matching of supply and demand that you have. And by the way, the whole idea of forecasting is then when you find you have imbalances that you give yourself enough time to actually deal with those things, whether it's I need to lighten up on my resources or I need to find and train and put in place new resources. So that's really, really important. And then 5th, again, is, you know, good PPM tool. It goes a long, long way towards helping the organization take that data, massage it, analyze it, and put it into you know, dashboards, reports, and formats that allow us then to make that information actionable for the organization. So I'll always keep coming back to, you know, good forecast process supported by a really good PSA/PPM tool. Will get you there.
Great, Randy. I like the simplified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's definitely good stuff. Brian, how about you next?
Well, I would just put it from the actual tooling perspective that if you're wanting to improve your resource forecasting, first understand the work from all of the sources that's being placed in front of the organization, so that you can understand what your needs are going to be. And then the second part is being able to understand the resources that you have to figure out if they can actually do the work that you need. And then to Randy's point, you're then able to have all the information you need to put a plan in place to meet those needs as they arise.
Great. And then last but not least, Tom, would you like to follow up with your next steps suggestions?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, for us, and what's really helped us out in trying to figure out how to best manage our resources is like I've been talking about, really identifying what's driving our resource needs. So before we set up our dashboard that I walked through, several of us project managers got in a room and filled up the whiteboard with what is driving our resources, what drives our projects, where's the bottlenecks at. So we actually created a flow chart of our own of an actual project, and where in that life cycle our critical resource planning needs at. And that's how we developed our dashboard. We identified those needs and where those needs are going to be, and created a system around those needs. So my advice would be, whenever you get whatever system you use, if so you get keyed in, right? You're going to get keyed in, and there's going to be a way to use keyed in, kind of, if you will, quote unquote, out of the box. And certainly keyed in and other project management systems, they all have a lot of power, and you can kind of use them a little bit differently. What we've learned is that when you're setting up your system, build it around your business rather than build your business into the system. And something like keyed in, a tool like keyed in, really allowed us to do that, combining custom reports with kind of the out-of-the-box widgets and other reports. We were really able to build our project management system around the way we work our business. So my advice would be sit down, brainstorm, use whiteboards or chalkboards or Gantt charts or whatever you want to do, and really identify what pieces of your business are driving resource needs. And then, just importantly, what piece of the business could throw you a curveball, where a bottleneck might be, or where a resource change might be, and understand, hey, if something doesn't go according to plan, how are we going to react, and how can we use the tools that we have to help us react in the most efficient way.
Great, Tom. Thanks. That is an awesome suggestion. I know we do a lot of whiteboarding here at Keyed In, so it's an effective way to get everybody's thoughts out on in one place. So now let's see if we have any questions from the attendees. There are a couple that came through. So Tom, there's actually one that's, we'll start with you, I guess, first, since you ended that part. Tom, you talked about your use of Keyed In for resource management. It says, what were you doing before, and how did you know you needed a tool?
Before Keyed In, we were Excel junkies, Microsoft Excel junkies. So we use Excel every day here at Prairie Capital, or an investment bank finance organization. We're always in Excel. So we actually were doing all of our project management out of Excel, and we built our own dashboards. Certainly they were not nearly as efficient as Keyed In. But what happened was, at the time, we were only one office. We now have 6 different locations. At the time, we only had 20 people in the office. We're now getting close to 50. So we just outgrew the Microsoft Excel way of doing things. So we needed a way to manage our resources across the entire organization in a very smooth and efficient and pretty much an automated way. So what we did was we took what we liked out of Excel and try to get that into the system. But then we also looked at the system and said, geez, how can we improve what we were doing manually? And what can Keyed In allow us to do in a much more effective way? And then probably equally as important, and what kind of data can Keyed In get us that we just don't have the ability to mine on our own? Keyed In houses a ton of data, and how do we see that data and use it effectively to manage our projects? So that's the long answer. The short answer is we were doing it manually, kind of pencil to paper, and we moved everything over to Keyed In. So at Prairie, we didn't have a project management system before Keyed In. What I will tell you is we all came from different places, and we've all used various types of project management systems. So we kind of seen what they can do, and we obviously settled on Keyed In as our selected source of project management.
Great, thanks, Tom. I know we see a lot of customers that come from that spreadsheet world, so it's a great transition to make. And actually, this is a good segue into a question that came in for Brian. If you're using a PM or PSA tool to help with capacity planning, what capabilities would you consider a must-have? Brian?
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Brian.
Excellent.
Yeah, go ahead.
I put rather long-winded answer out there in the question session. But I would say the two main capabilities you want to look for in a solution are one where you can aggregate all of the demand from all of the sources. You really have to have a good handle on the work that's being asked of the organization and what it might take to carry that work out. The second part is from a resource management perspective, being able to understand the capacity and skills of the resources that you have in order to identify any gaps. And by being able to look at the two of them together, you'll get that view into the capacity of resources that you need to actually carry out the work. And some of that work you might not be able to carry out because you simply don't have those type of resources. But if you do, then it gives you the information to start a plan. Again, back to one of the comments that Randy made in his 5 points, be able to put together a plan to get that kind of resourcing that you need, whether it's by hiring or whether it's by retraining resources that you already have. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brian. Randy, we're going to just do one last question here. So why has there been so much focus on project management best practices and so little on the resource management side?
The industry for a long time has focused on project management and quality methods to address good project management, by the way, as they should. But a critical element got left out of that process or didn't get the same level of emphasis at a bare minimum, and that was resource management. And, it's interesting, I saw some data at a recent Gartner conference that talked about where we were 20 years ago in project failures, and essentially the industry as a whole, enterprise IT, are still experiencing project failure rates about the same as they were 20 years ago, yet most organizations have invested a ton of money in project management tools, training, as well as quality systems. And we would assert, and the reason the Resource Management Institute got formed was we got tons of data and research that clearly shows that the biggest reason projects fail in most cases is simply we couldn't get the right person with the right skills in the right place at the right moment in time. And that's not a quote-unquote project management issue so much as it's a resource management issue. So it's not that we don't think project management and quality management are not important. They're very important. We just think that if you're going to try to build project management effectiveness into your organization, that at a bare minimum, you ought to start with building the right processes as well as a supporting tool to do great project management. Great resource management, and then layer on good project management and quality management systems. So, the industry is catching up. We find, by the way, we work with organizations on the enterprise IT side. We also work with organizations selling billable, consultative, and professional services. And we find that industry is a little further ahead of enterprise IT in that they got an earlier start on this problem, but both have a ways to go to get better at it. And because human capital is generally the overwhelming part of our cost, it's really important that organizations get that right. So, just the legacy has been we focused too much on project management and quality management, not enough on resource management. I think the industry clearly is waking up to the difference. The Institute is there to try to become an advocate to rally the industry around collectively getting better at that. The lack of a methodology. So we've introduced what we think is the first commercial grade resource management methodology into the industry, and a certification program to go with that. And we think that's really, really important. So, so we're glad to see companies like Keyed In from a technological standpoint also getting behind and putting lots of emphasis on how important solving this resource management need is, because it's got to be done with both process and good technology. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Yeah, Randy, thanks. We definitely are seeing that same trend here at Keyed In. So it's great to see that RMI is as well. So I think that shall do it for today. Thank you to the panelists, Randy, Tom, and Brian. for participating. You provided some great insight on resource forecasting best practices and those trends that we talked about. So thanks again. The recording of this session will be sent out early next week, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great day.